Good morning and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Dave Deacon. Over the past couple weeks, most of the state has received at least a little bit of rainfall, which has been beneficial to the summer crops. SUNUP's Curtis Hare caught up with Oklahoma State University Extension Cropping System Specialist, Dr. Josh Lofton, to get an update on the corn crop.
We're talking summer crops right now with Josh Lofton, our Extension Cropping System Specialist. So Josh, how are summer crops looking right now?
They're actually looking pretty good. We always talk about those timely July rains, and I think a bulk majority of the state. We do have some areas that haven't quite been as fortunate as others, but I think most folks have caught at least one or two of those July rains, and really that's what we gauge the how good the summer crops are going to be. Therefore, what we're seeing is a lot of our summer crops, while they were going backwards at the 1st of July, they've almost turned a corner, and if they have enough maturity left in them, they potentially could turn that corner for favorable and look pretty good at the end of the year.
You mentioned maturity, and we're holding corn, which we don't just normally do in our interviews every. You do. You just hang out with the corn. So right now, you can. There's actually ways that you can look at the maturity in the corn.
Yeah, actually, from the time we get tassels out in corn, we shift maturity looking at the plant itself to looking at the cobs, and that's kind of how we go through. A lot of people, when they see a corn ear and they see what's called dent, where we get these little kind of indentions on these corn, they call it, oh, well, I'm close to maturity. Not even close. That's a phase or two from physiological maturity. And if you actually open this cob up, and this is the best way to kind of tell it, what we actually have, and once we dent that corn kernel, we actually have what's called a milk line. And if you take a look here at the cob itself, we see to where it goes from a very, very stark, sharp yellow to kind of almost a paler yellow. The stuff on the top that's really sharp, that's mature. We've already transitioned to a lot of starches, carbohydrates. The bottom half is still very, very liquidy. It still hasn't developed its total seed weight yet. So depending on where we are on there is quite a bit left in the season. From the time we dent to the time we reach black layer, which is what our actual maturity on corn is about 28 days. So we got about 4 weeks, and it'll go down about a quarter each week. But it also tells us how much yield we have left in the field that we could lose. If we're just now at dent, we potentially could have 30% of the seed weight still to be filled. By the time we get to about a half to a quarter, we're looking about maybe 10 to 20%. That's still quite a lot to lose late season. So if we do have growers that are irrigating, remember, we need enough moisture to go all the way to black layer.
So when it comes to summer crops, we're always concerned, and producers are always concerned with pests and pest control. What's the pest pressure that you've been seeing this year in regards to summer crops?
Well, I think we've talked about it all year that weeds are an issue, and they're continuing to be an issue, especially as we get these big timely rains. Some of the earlier planted stuff didn't quite canopy in some instances, so we are still seeing a lot of weed pressure. The other thing we're kind of concerned with this year is the amount of worm damage we're seeing in corn. There's a lot of indication that we're seeing a lot of earworm damage, and you can actually see here we got a little corn earworm that's just snuck into this seed. You see caused a lot of damage to the top end of this. That typically is okay, very little yield effect from this, but as this corn matures and this corn earworm or these worms mature in the corn, they go and they turn into adults. If they stay in place, this could mean that we have a high pest pressure for some of our sorghum, our soybean, and maybe even our cotton crops. So something to keep a lookout as growers start to see this corn mature and start being harvested in the field. We need to make sure if you're running traps, that we're checking traps. If we're scouting fields, that we're scouting fields pretty heavily, because a lot of these bugs that are in this corn right now could move to some of our other subsequent crops, and growers need to be prepared for that.
All righty, Josh. Josh Lofton, Cropping System Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Summer crops are growing across the state. Kim, where are we with crop prices in general?
Well, if you look at wheat in northern Oklahoma, they're around 410. You go southern Oklahoma, Snyder, that area, they're up 4 1/4. Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle around 4.20. You look at corn forward contract for harvest delivery around $3.20. But this was the year to plant milo because milo is about $3.50, about 30 cents higher than corn, and soybeans is a little above $8.
You were talking about wheat prices back there. We actually had fairly good prices at the beginning of harvest. What happened after that?
Well, you look at early June, wheat prices in Oklahoma up around $4.50, $4.60, but 3 weeks later, we were down in the $4 range. During harvest, we got down below $4, then we got up to about $4.25. We're down to about $4.10 now. I think what happened is, one, we had relatively high yields and we had relatively low protein. I think, coming into harvest, expectations were a little better than that. When the market saw we didn't have the protein, then I think they took prices down relatively fast.
So often you talk about the protein, and we've been emphasizing that over the past couple of years, but which one is really worth more, the yield or the protein?
Well, if you go back to harvest, we probably between 11.2, which is where we ended up with our protein, and 11.2, the market's wanting, or the mills want about 12.4 for their milling wheat. The protein premium there is around 50 or 55 cents. However, our yields in Oklahoma were 42 bushels per acre compared to 40 last year. You go to our average 33, so 42 versus 33, that's a 27% increase in yields. So if you multiply 410 by 1.27, you got $5.10 equivalent wheat. So what would I say is most important? If you can get 27% higher production, that's going to trump protein any day.
Last week on the show, we actually had Dr. Brian Arnell on talking about how higher protein can be achieved through nitrogen. What should producers do as they go into the next planting season, whenever it comes to making those decisions about input costs?
Well, they got to keep their costs down, they got to keep their yields relatively high, and they've got to have quality. Now, if they can get to 42 bushels plus the protein, in other words, rather than having $5.20 wheat or $5.10 wheat, you add 40 cents to that, they've got $5.50 wheat. So I think if they've got to look at what it costs to get that protein, and they got to look at what it costs to get that yield, and then calculate their break even. Producers that got 42, well, say half the producers got more than 42. They did relatively well this year. At least they covered their variable cost.
Again, protein has been on the mind. How long do you think that will be a determining factor for the price of wheat?
Well, protein is elusive. I said it was a 55 cent premium. Right now, that premium's down to 20 or 25 cents because once we got Kansas and North, the average protein for the hard red winter wheat crop went from 11.2 to 11.8. In other words, we had 11.2 or less protein on the average. North of here, they have 12 or better average, because now it's averaging 11.8. So that protein is an elusive premium. So yields, on the other hand, it's always there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
As you drive across the countryside in Oklahoma, you'll obviously see in a lot of hay meadows some big round bales being put up for winter feed to be used for those cows next November, December, January, and February. I guarantee that the variation in the quality of that hay is going to be dramatic this year and every year. So knowing what's in the forage is very, very key in terms of doing the proper job of supplementing that forage next winter in order to take good care of the beef cows and at the same time be the most efficient in spending your supplement dollars. So I really, really think, as boring as it sounds, that it's a good idea to get forage tests run this and every summer after you put up that hay to see actually what the quality of the hay is and therefore the amount of supplement that's going to be needed. I would suggest that you download a fact sheet written by Dr. Lallman here at Oklahoma State University called Supplementing Beef Cows. And in it, it'll give you some comparisons as to the differences in the amount of supplement that may be needed for the different qualities of grass hay that you stored and will feed in the wintertime. Just looking at that fact sheet and doing some other calculations, I've been able to determine that feeding the same cow in late gestation, the amount of high protein supplement may vary by as much as 3-fold, just depending upon the quality of the hay that you put up during the summertime. And so it's very, very important to know what's in that hay and then match the supplement to the hay and the forage that these cows are consuming. Go also to the SUNUP website. That's sunup.okstate.edu. We'll have a link to that fact sheet there, as well as a fact sheet from the Plant and Soil Sciences Department on how to sample hay bales for the proper way in order to get a good forage analysis. When you look at that fact sheet, it also has a list at the end of many different forage probes that you can order and purchase. I'd really suggest, again, that you do some shopping and look at each one of these forage probes as a possibility. Some of them cost several hundreds of dollars, and so it depends upon how much you're going to use the probe, and perhaps if you can share it with a neighbor or some of your relatives that also are putting up hay, and perhaps share some of those costs. They can be expensive, so you want to do some shopping around, make sure that you're getting one that works best for you. If you'll sample the hay this and every summer and have an idea what's in that hay, match that supplementation to the hay, I think in the long run it'll save you some money and get those cows through the winter in good body condition. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
We're moving right along in the growing season with pecans. So Becky, how is the crop looking this year?
Well, here at the research station, it looks really good. We're kind of a different setup than a lot of our growers across the state because we're kind of an upland site, and you can see on some of these trees we've got almost every shoot's got a nut. But there's a lot of places that it's down quite a bit.
So last year, in a lot of the main areas where they grow pecans, like in the Northeast, there were a lot of rains and floods that they had to deal with. Is that impacting this year's crop at all?
Well, pecans are kind of interesting in that when they're ripening the crop in one year, they're also getting ready for the crop the following season. So if something's stressing them in the year before, they may not have much of a crop the following season. But a lot of the reason that they don't have a crop in some locations is because that late April freeze. Now, those places up northeast that they stood underwater for months at a time, they had a reduction in their root mass that just kind of slowly kills those root systems. And so when it's really dry, like in the Northeast right now, they haven't had their normal rainfall. Those trees are going to have problems going out to find water to bring up to those trees and keep them healthy.
So as we're kind of moving along deeper into the heart of the summer, it's getting hotter, which means insects are even more out. So what has there been much insect pressure with pecans this year?
Well, we've had a lot of sawfly feeding, which is not really a major pest. It just causes little holes in the leaves. We don't usually treat for it. Seen a lot of that this year. We haven't started monitoring for our weevil yet. We'll be putting up our traps soon, and that's something that's very important. Pecan weevil can be a huge pest for our pecan growers. They start feeding on the nut when they're in the water stage, and when that nut transitions to the dough stage, when it's filling out and making that kernel, then they start laying the eggs in those nuts. And at that point, really not much you can do for that if they've already laid eggs in the nuts. So we use circle traps on the tree trunks to help us to know when they're coming out of the ground and when we need to spray.
So moving forward, you actually have a kind of like a virtual field day that's coming up, talking with producers about thinning out the crop and things that they need to be looking forward to going into harvest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been offering a monthly Zoom meeting. We started in May, and it's been very well received. We meet, this next session will be August 7th, and we'll talk about what's happening during August, what they need to be thinking about. There's a lot of things that they need to know based on the maturity of that nut.
All right, thanks, Becky. Becky Carroll, Associate Extension Specialist here at Oklahoma State University. And for a link to the upcoming Zoom, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Well, I think all of us are aware that right now it's getting pretty warm. The heat's going up. We've had some days with some very high heat plus humidity, which is extremely dangerous for our animals, especially our pets. So owners need to be aware of that. If your pet's going to be outside, you need to make sure there's shade for that animal. You need to make sure that animal has fresh, cool, clean water. Cool water is important because animals are a lot more likely to drink water if it's cool, so you may need to add some ice to that water, and you probably need to change it frequently. Can't just put it in there once a day or so because it's going to get pretty hot with these days. It's important to know that your dogs, that certain breeds are going to have more problem with the heat. Those dogs that are short-nosed, your boxers and bulldogs, those types of breeds are going to have more problem with this heat. Probably ought to have a conversation with your veterinarian about shearing your dog. Sometimes that long hair coat is an insulating factor against the heat. It insulates against the cold, but it also will insulate against the heat. So have a conversation with your veterinarian about that, about whether you want to get your dog clipped or not. I think the other thing I would needed to mention is, if you're going to walk your dog, be sure and walk it early in the morning or late in the evening, and be careful about the pavements. That concrete and asphalt may be too hot for the paws, and you can get some damage to those paws, so try to walk them in the grass if you can. It's also important to be careful about leaving a dog or cat in your car. You know, those temperatures can elevate really rapidly. It's just not a good idea to have your dog or cat, leave your dog or cat in a car. I think other things you need to be aware of is to watch your animals closely. If you see any signs of nervousness, or you've got a dog that's excessively panting and is just not getting any better, maybe they're a little wobbly or something like that. If you have a dog like that, those are the beginning signs of heat stress. You need to get your dog to an emergency veterinary at that point in order to take care of that problem. If you'd like any more information about heat stress in animals, if you'll go to sunup.okstate.edu.
The overall livestock markets have been in the news over the past couple months. Daryl, you've been answering questions about it. Are there efficiencies in the markets? Are markets working the way that they should? I mean, we've seen some bumps over the past couple months.
We've certainly learned some things over, all we've been through here so far in 2020, in particular, about how markets work. Markets do their thing most of the times, I think, so subtly that we really don't think about or maybe even understand how they do what they do. When you have the kind of disruptions that we've faced this year, then it really reveals some of those things. So obviously, when you have the kind of workforce disruption at the packing level that we had this year, then we see some vulnerabilities there. We've seen some impacts, and that does lead to some very legitimate questions going forward about whether or not we need to think about a little bit more robust kind of a system that would be a little more shockproof in that sense. The other thing, though, is that as we look at how these markets have responded to all of the shocks and challenges we've had, certainly people have questioned whether they're really working. And as an economist, my answer is, yeah, they're working the way they're supposed to. It's just not a way that we often see in many cases. And so we have seen situations where there's been disruption in that marketing sector, and that means that wholesale and retail markets are going one direction while animal markets are going in the other direction. And that's actually a perfectly normal response to the kind of situation we've seen.
And really, this system is relatively new. I mean, it's only a few decades old.
That's true. We've evolved a lot. If you stop and think about how beef markets work compared to, say, the 1960s when we were still a carcass-based industry, marketing, carcasses on the rail, those kind of things, and you look at where we've gotten to since then, we have come a long ways, very specialized, again, very efficient. We have maximized the value of these carcasses by being able to tap into so many different markets, both domestically and internationally. And so,
you know, again, it's easy to take that for granted a lot of times. And so, you know, I'm not telling people we shouldn't consider some changes, but I am telling them to proceed with caution as we think about those changes and make sure we really understand whether or not we're going to maybe impact some things in a negative way that we really don't mean to impact.
Is there a potential for another jolt to the system in the future?
Well, there always is some potential, and you know, one of my answers when people ask me, do we need to somehow restructure our industry to be a little more resilient in the case of something like this? And there's a couple of ways to look at that. One is, well, yes, we would like to be a little more resilient. The question is, what would you give up? What sort of trade-off would there be if you do that? The other one is sort of, what's the likelihood of something like this happening again? I can't answer that at this point. If we perceive that somehow things have changed and this is a higher probability event, then we probably do need to build some additional resilience in our system. If we think this is, you know, a very, very unique black swan kind of an event that's, you know, not a one-off, you can't ever say it couldn't happen again, but maybe unlikely to ever happen exactly this way again, then maybe we don't need to make a lot of changes long-term that would have, you know, some other offsetting, perhaps negative consequences.
Well, thanks for answering our question. Dr. Darrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Hi, Wes Lee with your weekly Mesonet weather report. Rains continued for parts of the state this past week, and for once, rain totals in the Panhandle are close to the top amounts. The 7-day rainfall map from Wednesday shows decent rain totals in the north and west. The highest total was 3 1/4 inches at Cherokee. Watonga came in next with just over 3 inches, and the Panhandle stations of Boise City and Goodwell each collected about 2.5 inches. A month ago, soil moisture was really good in the central 2/3 of the state, as shown by this 4-inch fractional water index from late June. Remember that 1 is the wet end of the scale, shown by green, and the dry end is indicated by 0 or the brown color. Jumping to Wednesday of last week, we see how things have changed. Now, with recent rains, parts of the Panhandle and north central regions are showing the wettest soils at 4 inches. If we look deeper in the soil, we still see drought issues in the Panhandle and most of the western third of the state. This map is the fractional water index at the 24-inch depth. You will notice fewer numbers at this depth as only part of the Mesonet stations have sensors this deep. Gary is up next talking about the monthly rainfall situation.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we've certainly been getting more of that rainfall, as Wes talked about, but not everybody, unfortunately. Let's get straight to the new drought monitor map and see what we have. Well, we knocked out a lot of that drought out in the Panhandle, which has been going on a long time. We still have some severe to extreme drought in Cimarron County and parts of far northwestern Texas County, and then of course some moderate to severe drought scattered as we get farther to the east in west central Oklahoma. And then a little bit of extreme drought has started to creep into far southwest Oklahoma. So it looks like for now that southwest Oklahoma is the new focus for strengthening and intensifying drought. Let's take a look at the last 30 days from the Mesonet for the rainfall accumulations. We do have some really great totals up there in north central Oklahoma and also out in the western Panhandle. 4 to 5 to close to 6 inches out in the western Panhandle. That's almost a third of their yearly rainfall in just the last 30 days. So that's great for those folks out there. The departure from normal in that same time frame, again, we can see out in the Panhandle and north central Oklahoma, lots of great surplus amounts there, 2 to 3, a little bit more than 3 inches in some cases. Then we see those deficits, however, across much of the state, a little bit more down in south central and southwest Oklahoma, but they are scattered about. We have to temper those with the amount of rainfall we got over the last 2 weeks, however, which is where we saw that improvement. There is a possibility for some tropical moisture next week, so let's hope some of that arrives and knocks some more of that drought out, especially across southwestern Oklahoma. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Too many pond owners are a little bit over-concerned about toxic algae. You need to know that algae, most species of algae, the great majority, are entirely normal and beneficial. The greenish color that we see in most ponds is an algal bloom in the water column. I would become concerned and watchful if I were to see an algal scum form on the surface. Now, what exactly is an algal scum? I would say that if you can pick something up with a stick, it is not an algal scum. But an algal scum is generally not something you can pick up. If in doubt about what you have, the standard advice is fence them out. And coordinate with your local county extension office to see about what they think as far as determining what's going on in your pond. Oftentimes that involves driving in a sample of water to the veterinary disease diagnostic lab on campus. We don't have an easy way to just look at a photo of a pond and say, aha, that is or is not toxic. It really needs to be examined microscopically, and your county extension office can coordinate with you to see about getting you in touch with the folks there to see exactly what they require in the way of a fresh sample to examine. But we don't have an easy answer for you, but we don't want you to be overly worried either. It's still a rare condition. Do not stress, just be watchful for those algal scums, and if you see one, keep people, livestock, and pets away from it.
Well, that does it for us this week on SUNUP. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, sunup.okstate.edu. And while you're there, check out our social media. I'm Dave Deacon from the EFOS station near campus. Remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at SUNUP.